If you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. When the channel reaches 1,000 subscribers, I'll share a surprise story I've prepared especially for you. The winter of 1944 pressed down on the small French farming village like a weight that refused to lift. The fields were covered with uneven ice, the barns half collapsed under old shell damage, and the air carried a constant low hum from distant artillery. Nothing moved unless it had to. Most people kept their heads down and their doors shut. Elise Moreau stepped into the ruins of her family's barn and closed the warped door behind her. The cold followed her inside anyway. Her boots sank slightly into frozen mud mixed with splintered boards. She wrapped her coat tighter around herself and looked over the makeshift shelter she had built. A pile of hay pushed against the surviving wall, a single wool blanket, and a lantern with a dim glow. It wasn't much, but it kept her alive. She had lived here since the shelling 3 weeks earlier. Her father was gone. Her mother had died in the first wave of bombs, and her younger brother had been taken by a German patrol that searched the village for laborers. That moment still replayed in her head every night. The shouting, the boots, her brother's face disappearing behind soldiers. She had no answers, only silence and fear. Before the war, she had worked as a mechanic's apprentice in the village workshop. She could fix engines, patch leaks, repair generators. Those skills now kept her fed. Villagers brought her broken tools, lanterns, and farming equipment in exchange for bread or potatoes. She forced herself to keep moving, even when her hands shook at the sound of heavy engines. She told herself she didn't have the luxury of breaking down. Tonight, the cold stung more than usual. As Elise knelt to adjust the lantern wick, she suddenly heard the crunch of snow outside. Slow, uneven steps. Someone was approaching the barn. Her chest tightened instantly. Not again. Not soldiers. Please, not again. The barn door pushed open with a heavy scrape. A man stepped inside, tall but slouched with exhaustion. His uniform was American, though torn and smeared with soot. He leaned heavily on one leg, the other stiff from an injury that he tried to hide, but didn't manage to. His rifle was taped in places, the barrel scratched raw. Mud and ash clung to his gloves. Elise froze, fingers gripping the lantern. The man lifted his hands slightly, not in surrender, but in a quiet attempt to show he meant no harm. "I'm not here to take anything," he said, voice low and strained. "Just need a place to rest. Just for a night." She studied him carefully. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with a face that would have been gentle if it weren't pulled tight from fatigue. His eyes showed someone who had gone too long without proper sleep. Someone who had fought recently. Someone who didn't want to fight anymore. "Who are you?" Elise asked, keeping her distance. "Private Adam Hale, U.S. Army." He swallowed hard, as if the words scraped his throat. "I got separated. Lost my squad." A short pause. "I won't cause trouble." Elise had heard rumors through villagers. An American who had survived an attack by a German crude M4 Sherman. They said he fought the crew alone after the tank ambushed his squad. Some claimed he crawled through mud and snow to disable it. Others said he was lucky. Most dismissed him as just a farmer who happened to survive. Seeing him now, Elise understood none of the rumors captured the truth. The man standing in front of her carried the kind of exhaustion that didn't come from stories. It came from surviving something he didn't want to remember. Her own fear tried to pull her backward. Every instinct told her to push him out before danger followed him in. But another part of her recognized the same emptiness she felt in herself. Loss, confusion, the quiet need for a place to be safe, even for a moment. "You can stay," she said finally, "but only in the barn, and only for tonight." Adam nodded once, grateful but restrained. He limped to a clear patch of hay near the wall and lowered himself with controlled movements. Elise saw the pain in his jaw as he tried to hide it. She noticed dried blood on his trousers. His wound was worse than he admitted. She didn't approach him. Not yet. She sat by the lantern instead, her eyes fixed on him while her thoughts spun. If he's telling the truth, he's alone. If he's lying, I can't fight him, but I can't throw him out either. Not in this cold. Adam didn't speak unless necessary. He removed his gloves slowly, revealing scraped knuckles. He looked around the barn. scanning exits and shadows with the alertness of someone who expected danger even here. Elise recognized that behavior. She had done the same for weeks. "What happened to your squad?" she asked quietly. Adam rested his head against the wooden beam behind him. For a few seconds, he didn't answer. Then he gave the simplest version possible. "Sherman, that wasn't ours. Germans took it, hit us near the river." Another pause. "I'm the only one who walked away." His tone didn't carry pride, only weight. Elise lowered her eyes, feeling the sting of empathy she didn't want to show. She knew what it meant to lose people and have no choice but to keep moving. Minutes passed. Only the wind broke the silence, pushing through cracks in the barn walls. Elise sat with her thoughts, replaying fragments of her past. Her brother smiling while working at the workshop, the sudden stillness after the shelling, her parents' empty chairs. She wondered what kept her going. Maybe routine, maybe stubbornness, maybe the hope that her brother was still alive. Across the barn, Adam's breathing slowed. Despite his guarded posture, exhaustion eventually pulled him into a half-sleep. The lantern light softened the deep lines of stress on his face. Elise finally allowed her shoulders to relax a little. She wasn't sure if she trusted him, but for the first time in days, the barn didn't feel entirely hopeless. Two strangers, both hurting in different ways, sharing the same cold shelter. She watched the lantern flame for a long moment before lying down on her side of the barn. Sleep didn't come easily, but the presence of another living person, one who seemed as lost as she was, kept the night from feeling as empty. Outside, the wind carried the distant thud of artillery, but neither of them moved. The barn, damaged as it was, held them together for one silent winter night. The cold morning light spread across the barn in a thin, pale line that reached Adam first. He woke with a quick, tense breath, the kind that came from nights spent sleeping in unsafe places. His injured leg throbbed, and he pressed his palm against the wound to steady himself before sitting up. The barn felt warmer than the night before, but only slightly. He listened carefully, wind, distant artillery, and the soft rustle of movement at the workbench. Elise was already awake. She stood with her sleeves rolled back, sorting through tools scattered across the table. Her movements were controlled and quiet. She didn't turn when she heard Adam shift, though he knew she was aware of every sound he made. She checked the edge of a bent metal wrench and set it aside for repair. Her hands were steady now, not like last night when fear ran through her every time a noise echoed outside. Adam pushed himself up slowly, careful not to disturb anything. The strain made his jaw tighten. Elise looked over, studying him for a few seconds. There was no hostility, just a cautious curiosity. "You're in pain," she said plainly. "It's manageable," he answered, though both of them knew it wasn't. Elise stepped closer and pointed to a low stool near the workbench. "Sit. I'll look at it." He hesitated. Letting someone near a wound wasn't something he did easily, not after what he'd seen on the front. But Elise had made a decision somewhere between last night and now. She wasn't letting him limp his leg into infection. Not in the cold. Not in a place where there were no doctors left. Adam sat. Elise pulled a small metal basin from the corner, filled it with what little warm water she had managed to heat, and knelt beside him. She cut the cloth strip around his leg and lowered her eyes, examining the swollen skin. It was worse than she expected. The bandage he had wrapped days ago was damp, dirt-stained, and stuck to the wound. "I'll be quick," she said. He nodded once. She peeled the cloth away carefully. Adam clenched his teeth, but didn't speak. Elise focused on the task, cleaning dried blood and dirt with slow, deliberate movements. Her own heartbeat climbed at the sight of the injury. She didn't want to show panic, not when he was sitting still, trusting her. Her fingers shook once, but she steadied them against the basin. "You didn't have supplies out there?" she asked. "Lost the kit when the tank hit us." She didn't push for details. She could see in his eyes that he wanted to keep the rest buried. When she finished cleaning, she wrapped the leg with fresh cloth torn from an old curtain. Adam exhaled slowly, not from relief, but from finally having someone else touch a wound he wasn't sure he could handle alone. "Thank you," he said. Elise stood and returned the basin to the side table. "You should rest." Walking on it will only make it worse. Adam shook his head. I can't lie around. I can help with something. Elise paused. She wasn't used to anyone wanting to help. Since the shelling, she had done everything herself, lifting beams, clearing debris, rebuilding what she could. But Adam wasn't asking out of pride. He needed to work. People who survive battles often did. There's lumber that needs moving, she said after a moment. The workshop wall is unstable. Adam pushed himself to his feet, using the beam for balance. Show me. They stepped outside into the yard. Frost covered everything, even the broken tools half buried in the mud. Elise pointed to a collapsed wooden beam leaning against the wall. Adam lifted it with a grunt and shifted it to the side. The pain hit him immediately, but he forced himself to steady his breath. He didn't want Elise to see him struggle. Elise worked beside him, clearing smaller pieces, sorting usable wood from ruined scraps. Their communication was minimal. She handed him nails without speaking. He responded with nods. Their teamwork developed naturally, each action falling into place without negotiation. Inside the barn again, Elise returned to her workstation. Adam took a seat near the doorway, adjusting his leg. The silence between them was not uncomfortable, only cautious. Why did you come this far? Elise asked after a long pause. Adam looked at the dirt floor before answering. My unit was pushing north. We ran into resistance near the river. I lost them there. I followed tracks and smoke until I ended up here. Are you planning to leave? She asked, her voice neutral but tight. He considered the question longer than she expected. Leaving meant moving toward danger again. Staying meant exposing her to whatever might follow him. Neither choice felt right. For now, he said quietly, it's safer here than out there. She accepted the answer with a short nod. She understood the weight of temporary refuge. She lived it every day. The generator sat silent in the corner, its casing dented, wires tangled. Elise glanced at it, then at Adam. Can you help me repair that? It hasn't worked since the shelling. Adam rose and approached the machine, crouching to inspect it. The damage was clear, but not hopeless. Yeah, he said. We can fix it. The word we landed differently between them. Elise felt a small, unexpected sense of relief. Adam felt something settle in him too. A strange awareness that this barn, broken as it was, had become a place where he wasn't entirely alone. They worked side by side for hours, tightening bolts, clearing ash from the carburetor, and adjusting wires. Their cooperation grew more natural. Elise noticed Adam's quiet way of focusing. He noticed her precision, the way she steadied tools despite the cold. By evening, the workshop looked more organized than it had since before the shelling. They sat near the lantern again, each exhausted from the work, but calmer than the night before. The wind outside had softened, carrying only the distant crackle of artillery. Neither spoke for a long time. They didn't need to. The day had already shown them more about each other than words could have. When the lantern dimmed, Elise rose to refuel it. Adam changed position to ease pressure on his leg. The barn felt different now. Less like a shelter for one and more like a space shared by two people held together by necessity, caution, and something faintly resembling trust. Tonight, the silence wasn't a burden. It was a boundary neither of them needed to cross. The cold settled deeper as evening approached, and the dim light inside the barn took on a dull, gray tone. The generator they had worked on sat disassembled across the workbench, pieces sorted into careful rows. Adam tightened the last bolt of the casing while Elise heated water over a small stove made from scrap metal. The quiet between them no longer felt like a test. It had turned into a steady rhythm that allowed both to breathe. Adam checked the wiring again, adjusting a connection Elise had repaired earlier. His movements were slower today. The leg he tried to ignore was beginning to stiffen, and each shift of his weight pushed discomfort through his body. He didn't want her to see it, but he knew she already had. Elise poured hot water into 2 cups and brought one to him. Drink, she said, placing it on the table. You look pale. He gave a small nod, grateful for the warmth. Elise stood beside him, her attention fixed on the generator. Will it work? It should, Adam answered. The coil was the real problem. The casing was just bent. You fixed most of the wiring already." She didn't respond with pride. She only watched as he attached the final section. Then she stepped back while he pulled the cord. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then caught with a low hum. The barn filled with a steady vibration. Elise let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The sound was a reminder of normal life: light, heat, work, and routine. Adam saw the relief in her face, and for a moment the weight on his shoulders eased. The generator ran for only a minute before he shut it off. "Needs fuel, but it's alive." "That's more than I expected," Elise said quietly. Footsteps crunched outside, slow, dragging steps that didn't follow the pattern of normal movement. Elise stiffened immediately, gripping the edge of the workbench. Adam reached for his rifle in one controlled motion, but he didn't stand. His leg couldn't support a sudden shift. The footsteps paused near the barn door. Elise whispered, "Stay quiet." She moved to the side window, pushing aside a loose plank to look out. Two sets of tracks in the snow led toward the neighboring houses. A German patrol had been seen in the area days earlier. Villagers mentioned tracks near the woods. Now the tracks were here. She backed away from the window, her breathing sharp and shallow. "They're close." Adam steadied himself. "How many?" "I saw two. Maybe more." He considered the limited space, the open gaps in the walls, and Elise's fear. Moving was dangerous. Staying still was also dangerous. He lowered his voice. "If they come in, don't run. Get behind a lumber stack." Elise looked at the stack of boards near the back wall. It wasn't much, but it provided enough cover for her small frame. "What about you?" "I'll handle it." She didn't argue, but her eyes held the same quiet dread she carried every time engines roared in the distance. She stood beside him instead of hiding, unable to step away while he sat injured. Adam looked at her, understanding without needing to say it. The footsteps eventually drifted away, heading toward the road. The sound faded into the wind. Elise leaned against the workbench, letting her hands fall to her sides. Adam placed his rifle back down, the tension in his body slowly unclenching. He shifted his leg, wincing at the pressure that returned once the adrenaline faded. "Are you all right?" she asked. "I'm fine," he said, but she saw the strain. She knelt by his side again, pulling up the edge of the cloth bandage. The wound was swollen. His time on the injured leg, combined with the cold, had made it worse. She looked up at him. "You can't keep moving like this. I don't have another choice." "You do now," she said quietly. He didn't know how to respond. Her voice wasn't commanding. It carried a steadiness built from days spent alone. She didn't want to lose the fragile sense of safety they had created. Elise cleaned the wound again, her hands pushing through her own fear to stay steady. Adam watched her concentrate, noticing the way her brow tightened when she saw infection beginning to form. She didn't mention it aloud. Instead, she reached for a small tin of herbs an old villager had given her. She pressed the paste gently over the wound and wrapped it again. "You should stay off it for a while," she said. Adam nodded, though he didn't like needing help. He shifted his weight and leaned against the wall to keep the pressure off. Elise stood, brushing dust off her skirt. "Why were patrols this close?" he asked. She hesitated before answering. Villagers said a German group is searching the hills for missing equipment and prisoners. They pass through sometimes, looking for signs. They think someone is hiding here. She inhaled slowly. "They might think I know something about my brother, or think I'm helping someone." Her voice wavered at the last word. Adam understood the fear she tried to hide. He had seen what patrols did when they suspected anything. He had seen entire families forced out of their homes for less. He spoke firmly. "They won't get to you." Elise didn't argue, but her eyes softened with a mix of doubt, hope, and exhaustion. She returned to the tools, needing to keep her hands busy. Adam watched her movements, the way she forced herself to stay upright despite the fear still lingering in her posture. Hours later, the barn grew darker as the last light faded. Elise lit the lantern and hung it from a nail near the rafters. Adam shifted closer to the wall, keeping his rifle within reach. Elise sat near the generator, her back against the workbench. Neither spoke. Their silence wasn't avoidance. It was the language of people who had survived too many shocks in too few days. Outside, new snow began to cover the patrol tracks. The wind carried no footsteps now, only the distant, fading echo of engines somewhere far across the hills. For the moment, the barn held steady. It wasn't peace, but it was safety, thin, temporary, and real enough for them to finally rest. The wind carried a deeper chill through the gaps in the barn walls as night settled in. Elise adjusted the lantern so its light spread across the workshop and tried to focus on small repairs, tightening screws, cleaning rust from a hinge, but her hands couldn't stay steady. The presence of the patrol earlier clung to her thoughts. She checked the window every few minutes, listening for footsteps that weren't there. Adam remained near the wall, keeping his injured legs stretched out and his rifle close. He watched Elise's movements carefully. She wasn't speaking, but he could feel the strain tightening around her shoulders. He recognized that kind of tension. It was the same weight he carried after losing his squad. "Elise," he said quietly. She stopped working and looked at him, her eyes sharp with worry she hadn't tried to hide since the patrol passed earlier. "If they return," Adam said, "we'll hear them before they reach the door. You're not alone here." She nodded, not fully reassured, but grateful that he said it. Her voice was low when she answered. "They've searched the houses in this area before. Not this barn. Not yet." Adam leaned forward, adjusting his position despite the pain. "If they come back, we'll handle it. Together." She let out a slow breath and returned to her tools, though her posture stayed tense. The barn door rattled suddenly as the wind pushed hard against it. Elise jumped, dropping the tool in her hand. Adam reached for his rifle instantly, eyes fixed on the door. When nothing else happened, Elise bit her lip and forced herself to pick up the tool again. Adam spoke calmly. "We need to reinforce the entrance. Tonight." Elise nodded, and they began working without further discussion. Adam directed from where he sat, telling her which boards to use and how to brace them so they wouldn't squeak or shift. Elise dragged heavy lumber from the back wall, her breath visible in the cold, and hammered the boards into place with controlled strikes to avoid noise. The reinforcement took time, but by the end the door looked sturdier than before. Elise brushed sawdust from her coat and stepped back to examine their work. Adam watched her closely, noticing the exhaustion in her movements. "You should rest," he said. "I'll rest later." Her voice carried the stubbornness of someone who had spent weeks surviving without anyone else's help. Adam didn't push her further. Instead, he shifted to check the window facing the road. Snow drifted against the frame, blurring the outside view. A sudden glow appeared in the distance, faint beams from moving lanterns. Elise froze, eyes widening. Adam lowered himself closer to the window without making a sound. Two shapes moved between the houses. German soldiers, slowly sweeping the village with lanterns. Elise's pulse quickened, and her breathing turned sharp. She backed away from the window, her mind racing. She could picture them pushing the barn door open, shouting orders, dragging her out as they had done with others. Her throat tightened. Adam reached out and rested a hand lightly on her arm. Steady, grounding, wordless reassurance. She didn't pull away. She needed the steadiness more than she wanted to admit. "They're patrolling through," Adam whispered. "Not searching yet." The lanterns moved slowly from house to house, stopping occasionally as the soldiers examined broken doors and scattered debris. The crunch of their boots grew louder before fading slightly as they passed. Elise hid behind the lumber stack Adam had pointed out earlier. He shifted so his body was between her and the door, rifle angled downward but ready. The lantern light from outside brushed across the barn wall for a moment, creating a pale flicker that stretched across his face. Minutes passed. The soldiers moved on, the sound of their boots fading toward the edge of the village. Elise stayed crouched even after the noise disappeared, unable to move. "It's all right," Adam said, keeping his voice low and steady. "They're leaving." She rose slowly, brushing dust from her skirt. Her breathing eased, but the fear lingered in her eyes. She looked around the barn, taking in the reinforced door, the repaired workshop, and Adam's injured condition. All of it made the truth feel heavier. If danger came again, she couldn't run. She sat near the lantern, pulling her coat tighter. Adam stayed close by, settling his rifle across his lap and watching the doorway. They didn't speak for a long time. Eventually, Elise broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. Before the shelling, my brother and I worked in a small repair shop. He was better at engines than I was. Faster, smarter. She swallowed. He would have known what to do tonight. How to stay calm. Adam listened without interrupting. He's alive, she said with quiet certainty. He has to be. Adam's gaze softened. Then we'll keep this place safe until he comes back. Elise looked at him, unsure how to respond. She searched his face, seeing not just a soldier, but someone who understood fear, loss, and the fight to hold on to something worth protecting. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. The understanding between them had already shifted. Adam checked the ammunition in his rifle, then set it aside. We should finish the workshop tomorrow, he said. We can make it stronger, warmer, safer. Elise nodded, her expression steadying. Yes. The lantern flickered as the wind eased outside. The distant sounds of the patrol were gone now, leaving only silence and the faint hum of cold air pressing against the barn walls. Elise lay down on her pile of hay. Adam leaned back against the wall with a quiet exhale, keeping one eye on the reinforced door. The barn no longer felt like a temporary shelter. It felt like a place being rebuilt piece by piece, by necessity, by fear, and by the small but growing trust they had formed. Outside, fresh snow covered the soldiers' footprints, hiding the danger that had passed and whatever might come next. The morning broke with a pale blue sky, the first clear day in weeks. Frost still clung to the edges of the barn roof, but the wind had softened, carrying a quieter, calmer air over the village. Elise stepped outside with a bucket of water and looked across the fields. Snow was beginning to melt in thin patches, exposing frozen soil underneath. It felt like the first small shift toward spring. Adam emerged slowly, leaning on the doorframe to ease pressure on his leg. The wound had begun to heal since Elise cleaned it more thoroughly. The swelling lessened, and the pain eased enough for him to walk short distances without forcing himself. He still moved cautiously, but the improvement was clear. Elise glanced at him. "How is it?" "Better," he said. "Thanks to you." She didn't smile, but the tension in her face loosened slightly. She returned the bucket to its place and brushed her hands against her coat. "We should finish the workshop today. The roof still needs reinforcements." Adam nodded. "Let's get it done." They spent the next hours rebuilding what the winter had nearly destroyed. Elise hammered nails into the remaining weak boards of the back wall. Adam trimmed broken edges from the workbench, restoring its shape so that tools could rest on it without slipping. They moved slowly but steadily, working in silence broken only by instructions or requests for tools. The generator, restored the day before, ran for short bursts to test its stability. The hum filled the barn with a sound that felt secure, steady, predictable, alive. Elise checked the fuel line twice to ensure nothing leaked. Adam fixed the latch on the casing to prevent vibrations. While they worked, villagers passed outside, heading toward the market square. Some looked toward the barn with curiosity. Others nodded in quiet acknowledgement. Word had spread that Elise had helped now. People who once avoided the damaged workshop approached with small requests: broken lanterns, tools worn by the winter, small farm parts that needed fixing. Elise accepted the items without hesitation. Adam adjusted his sleeve and took the lanterns to the bench, examining the damaged wiring with practiced movements. For the first time since the shelling, the barn carried the rhythm of work again. During a short break, Elise sat near the open doorway, warming her hands over a small stove. She watched the villagers move in cautious groups, carrying supplies and speaking in hushed tones. Adam joined her, his steps slow but steady. "They seem calmer today," he said. "They've been afraid for weeks," Elise replied. "But patrols didn't return last night. Maybe they believe the danger is moving away." Adam lowered himself onto a crate beside her. "What about you?" She hesitated. "I feel steadier. Not safe, but steadier." He understood what she meant. Safety didn't exist during war, but steadiness, routine, work, company, was something you could build. A distant motor rumbled from the road, not loud enough to signal danger. Elise turned toward the sound. A small group of resistance volunteers arrived in the village, wearing heavy coats marked with mud and travel. They carried rifles slung across their backs, but moved calmly, speaking with villagers. One of the volunteers approached the barn, a young man with an armband. Elise stepped closer, her heartbeat quickening. "We're moving people from the northern valley," the volunteer said. "Ran into a boy near the river. Said he came from this village. He's safe. We're bringing him here." Elise's breath caught. "My brother?" The volunteer nodded. "We're escorting him. He's shaken but unharmed. He should reach the village by tomorrow morning." Elise stood motionless for a moment. Her throat tightened and her hands trembled, not out of fear this time, but relief so sharp it made her feel unsteady. Adam watched her, seeing the emotion she tried to keep controlled. "He's alive," she whispered. Her eyes filled, but she blinked hard, steadying herself. Adam didn't speak immediately. He simply placed a hand on the doorway, grounding the moment. The volunteer departed, and silence filled the barn again. But it was a different kind now, lighter, full of something Elise had almost forgotten. She turned to Adam, searching for words. "I thought I'd lost him. Every day, I try not to think about it. You held this place together alone," Adam said. "You brought him home." Elise swallowed hard, letting the weight of the moment settle. She didn't cry, but the relief showed in every part of her. By late afternoon, the workshop was fully restored. Tools hung neatly on the wall. The generator worked with a steady hum. The roof no longer sagged. Elise cleaned the workbench while Adam arranged the lanterns the villagers had brought. As the sun dropped behind the hills, the barn filled with warm lantern light. Elise sat on the hay near her sleeping area. Adam lowered himself onto a crate beside her, resting his rifle within reach, but finally easing his guard. "You don't have to leave," she said quietly. "Not after everything. Not now." Adam looked at her with a mixture of relief and hesitation. "Are you sure?" She met his eyes without wavering. "I want you here." It wasn't dramatic or emotional. It was clear, steady, honest. Adam nodded. "Then I'll stay." The silence that followed was calm, not tense. For the first time, Elise felt the barn as a place where life could begin again. Adam felt something similar, something he hadn't felt since before he lost his squad. A sense of direction. Night settled. Elise tightened the blanket over her makeshift bed. Adam leaned back against the wall, keeping the lantern lit beside him. Outside, snow continued to melt. The patrol tracks disappeared. The road clear enough for travel. And somewhere beyond the fields, a young boy made his way home under the protection of people determined to keep him alive. By morning, he would stand in the barn doorway, and Elise's world would finally be whole again. Inside the barn, Adam and Elise shared a quiet, steady understanding, the kind formed not by grand promises, but by choosing to stay when it mattered. Their winter of fear had begun to break, replaced by the start of something that felt real, lasting, and entirely their own.